A shelter dog gave birth to 5 puppies, then the vet screamed in shock when he saw what came out. What should have been a routine delivery turns into something no one could have imagined. 5 tiny lives arrive, each marked by a rare condition that shouldn't even be possible in one litter. But when the vet digs deeper, he uncovers something far darker than nature's mistake. Something powerful, hidden, and dangerous. Suddenly, the shelter is no longer a place of safety, but a battleground where truth, money, and survival collide. What secret is hidden inside these fragile puppies, and how far will someone go to make sure no one ever finds out? Thunder crackled outside the county shelter's whelping room as Dr. Hollis Renton checked Reva's vitals one more time. The German Shepherd's ribs showed clearly through her dull coat, evidence of the neglect she'd endured before being rescued. Her labor had started 2 hours ago, and her breathing was becoming more labored with each contraction. "How's she doing?" Lark Benning asked, adjusting the heat lamp above the whelping box. Her practiced hands moved quickly, arranging clean towels and emergency supplies. "Blood pressure's holding steady," Hollis replied, his voice calm despite his concern. He'd delivered countless puppies over his years as shelter veterinarian, but something about Reva's condition made him uneasy. "She's fighting hard." Lightning flashed, illuminating the stark medical room. Reva whimpered, her body tensing as another contraction gripped her. "First one's coming," Lark announced, positioning herself at the ready. Rain pelted against the windows as Reva pushed, and within moments, the first puppy emerged. Hollis's heart stopped. The pup was ghostly pale, almost white, with pink skin visible through its sparse fur. But what made his blood run cold were its eyes, or rather, where its eyes should have been. The sockets appeared malformed, sunken into its tiny skull. "Dear God," he whispered, quickly clearing the puppy's airways and rubbing it vigorously with a towel. The pup gave a weak cry, but its struggles seemed uncoordinated. "What's wrong with it?" Lark asked, her voice tight with worry. Before Hollis could answer, Reva's body contracted again. The second puppy arrived quickly, bearing the same alarming characteristics: white coat, pink skin, and malformed eyes. "No, no, no," Hollis muttered, his hands shaking slightly as he tended to the second pup. "This can't be." The next 20 minutes brought 3 more puppies, each one identical to their siblings, all showing signs of severe genetic defects. Hollis's initial concern had transformed into full-blown horror. "They're double merles," he finally said, his voice cracking. The words came out as almost a scream of disbelief. "All 5 of them! Double merles!" Lark's face paled as understanding dawned. But that would mean both parents were merle-colored dogs. Hollis finished grimly, checking each puppy's vital signs. Someone deliberately bred 2 merle dogs together, knowing the risks. 25% chance for each puppy to be born like this. Deaf, blind, or both. But all 5? The whelping room had become a triage zone. Hollis moved with focused intensity between Reva and her puppies, monitoring their conditions. The mother dog was exhausted but stable. Her puppies, though alive, faced an uncertain future. "Get me the warming pads," Hollis directed Lark, who rushed to comply. "And call Dr. Martinez at the emergency clinic. We need to arrange for detailed evaluations of their eyes and hearing as soon as possible." Lark cradled one of the tiny pups as she made the call. Its pink nose worked frantically, seeking its mother by scent alone. "They're so beautiful," she whispered. "Even with their problems, they didn't ask for this." Hollis nodded grimly, watching as Reva gently nuzzled her babies, guiding them to nurse despite their awkward movements. The storm outside had begun to fade, but the tension in the room remained palpable. 5 puppies, he said quietly, recording their weights and conditions in the medical chart. 5 innocent lives affected by human greed and irresponsibility. Whoever bred Reva knew exactly what they were doing. Merle-to-merle breeding is genetics 101. This was no accident. Lark helped position the puppies closer to their mother's warm body. "What are their chances?" "It varies," Hollis replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "Some double merles live relatively normal lives with proper care. Others..." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Right now, we focus on keeping them alive and comfortable. Then we'll assess each one's specific needs. The tiny family huddled together in the whelping box, the puppies' pale forms stark against their mother's darker coat. Reva's gentle brown eyes watched Hollis and Lark work, trusting them completely with her precious babies. "I've never seen anything like this," Lark admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 out of 5. The odds are astronomical, Hollis finished, his jaw set in a hard line. "Which makes me think there's more to Reva's story than we know. No responsible breeder would ever risk this. Someone out there is running an operation that needs to be stopped." Outside, the storm had passed, but inside the whelping room, the air remained charged with the weight of what they'd witnessed. 5 tiny lives, already facing tremendous challenges, depended on them. Hollis watched as the puppies nursed, their small bodies pressed together for warmth, and silently renewed his commitment to uncovering the truth behind their existence. Thunder rattled the shelter windows as Dr. Blost. Hollis Renton slumped onto a metal stool, his scrubs damp with sweat from the intense delivery. The whelping room's harsh fluorescent lights cast an unforgiving glow over the 5 tiny puppies nestled against their mother Reva's belly. Each one was smaller than his palm, their skin an unsettling shade of pink-white that made his stomach clench. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered, reaching for his penlight. Lark Benning moved quietly beside him, recording vital signs on a clipboard while shooting concerned glances at the newborns. With gentle fingers, Hollis examined each puppy in turn. Their eyes, still sealed shut, showed the telltale blue-white opacity through paper-thin lids. Their noses were pale pink, lacking proper pigmentation. Most troubling was their size, each pup significantly smaller than normal for German Shepherd newborns. "All 5 showing identical markers for double Merle genetics," he said, his voice tight. "The statistical probability of this happening naturally is." He shook his head, unable to even calculate it. Lark set down her clipboard. "What exactly does that mean, Dr. Renton?" "Double Merle occurs when 2 dogs carrying the Merle gene are deliberately bred together," he explained, his fingers still ghosting over the puppy's delicate forms. "It's highly dangerous, creates a 25% chance of severe defects, deafness, vision problems, sometimes both." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Lark's worried face. "But all 5 puppies? That can't be random chance." "No," Hollis agreed grimly. "This was intentional breeding. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." He reached for his phone and began taking careful photographs of each puppy, documenting their conditions. "We need detailed records of everything. Weights, markings, any visible abnormalities." Lark grabbed fresh forms and started noting down measurements as Hollis called them out. Puppy 1, 8.2 ounces. Notable lack of pigmentation around eyes and nose. Possible microphthalmia in left eye. They worked methodically through all 5 puppies, creating thorough documentation. Reva watched them with tired but trusting eyes, her thin frame barely recovered from the strain of delivery. "Their hearing and vision problems won't be fully apparent for weeks," Hollis said, gently returning the last pup to its mother. "But, given the complete expression of double Merle traits in all 5, he trailed off, his jaw tightening. "This is bad, isn't it?" Lark asked softly, reading his expression. Hollis nodded slowly. "Whoever bred Reva knew exactly what genetic markers she carried. They paired her specifically with another Merle carrier to produce this litter." His hands clenched into fists. This wasn't backyard breeding gone wrong. This was calculated. Standing up, he began gathering additional supplies, warming pads, feeding tubes in case the puppies had trouble nursing, extra blankets. His movements were precise but tense, like a man preparing for battle. "We need to start a separate medical file," he instructed Lark. "Everything documented in triplicate. Photos, measurements, detailed notes on their conditions, and we need blood samples from Reva and all 5 puppies." "You think this could be part of something bigger?" Lark asked, already moving to gather the necessary equipment. "I don't think I know," Hollis replied. "No responsible breeder would ever risk a double Merle litter, let alone deliberately create one. This was done with full knowledge of the consequences." He paused, watching the tiny puppies squirming against their mother. Someone's breeding dogs to be disabled on purpose. Lark's hand flew to her mouth. But why would anyone? That's what we need to find out. Hollis began preparing slides for blood samples. For now, we focus on keeping them alive and gathering evidence. These puppies are proof of something very wrong happening in our county. They worked late into the night, the storm gradually fading to a gentle rain outside. Every detail was photographed, measured, and recorded. Hollis insisted on taking multiple copies of all documentation, storing them in separate locations. "Keep one set in your locker," he told Lark, handing her a sealed envelope. "I'll keep one in my office and one at home. We can't risk losing any of this." Lark nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What do we do next?" Hollis watched as one of the puppies let out a tiny squeak, blindly nuzzling closer to Reva. "We wait. We watch. We document everything." His voice was quiet but determined. "And we start looking for patterns. Reva isn't the first pregnant stray to come through here. We need to review all our recent cases." "I'll help," Lark offered immediately. "I can start going through the files tomorrow." "Carefully," Hollis cautioned. "We can't draw attention to what we're doing. Not yet." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "Someone out there is deliberately creating disabled puppies. We need to know why before we can stop them." The night stretched on as they continued their work, the only sounds the gentle whimpers of the newborn puppies and the soft patter of rain against the windows. Every measurement, every photograph, every notation felt like pieces of a darker puzzle, one that Hollis was determined to solve. As he made his final notes for the night, his pen pressed hard against the paper, each word a promise to the tiny lives depending on him. This wasn't just a medical case anymore. It was the beginning of something much bigger, and he would see it through, no matter the cost. The next morning arrived with harsh fluorescent lights replacing the storm's darkness. Hollis had barely slept, catching only a few restless hours on the break room couch. He was checking Reva and her puppies when Lark burst through the door, her face flushed with urgency. "I scanned Reva's microchip," she said, holding up a printout. "You need to see this." Hollis took the paper, his eyes narrowing as he read. Ellery Ridge Kennel? The name was familiar. It appeared on donor plaques throughout the shelter. Boyd Ellery's breeding operation. Lark confirmed, twisting her hands nervously. "He's one of our biggest donors. The shelter practically runs on his contributions." Before Hollis could respond, the door swung open again. Marla Quaid strode in, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum. Behind her stood Boyd Ellery himself, filling the doorframe with his broad shoulders and expensive ranch coat. "Dr. Renton," Marla said, her practiced smile not reaching her eyes. "Mr. Ellery is here to collect his property. Please prepare Reva and her puppies for transport." Hollis stood slowly, positioning himself between the visitors and the whelping box. "I'm afraid that's not possible. These animals are under medical hold." "Medical hold?" Boyd's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "That's my breeding stock you're holding. I have the papers right here." He waved a folder of documents. "These puppies were deliberately bred for genetic defects," Hollis said quietly but firmly. "They need specialized care and monitoring. They're not going anywhere." Marla's smile vanished. "Dr. Renton, may I speak with you privately?" She gestured toward the hallway. "Whatever you need to say can be said here," Hollis replied, not moving from his protective stance. "Fine." Marla's voice turned cold. "Mr. Ellery's donations keep this shelter operating. Without his support, we'd have to cut staff and services. Is that what you want?" "I want to uphold our duty to protect animals from abuse and neglect," Hollis answered. He turned to Boyd. "Double merle breeding is cruel and irresponsible. These puppies will face lifelong health challenges." Boyd's face darkened. "You're overstepping, Doctor. Those are valuable snow shepherds, bred for their unique appearance. My clients pay premium prices for them." "You mean you're profiting from deliberately creating disabled dogs?" Hollis corrected. He moved to his desk and pulled out the detailed documentation from the night before. "I have evidence of genetic testing that proves this was intentional breeding." "Dr. Renton," Marla cut in sharply, "this is your final warning. Release the dogs to Mr. Ellery or face immediate suspension." Lark stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly but determined. If you suspend Dr. Renton, you'll have to suspend me too. I helped document everything. We have proof of what's happening here. Marla's face paled. Lark, think about what you're doing. Your job. My job is to care for animals, Lark interrupted. Not look the other way while they're exploited. Hollis moved to the door, closing it firmly and turning the lock. These animals are staying under medical care. If you want to remove them, you'll need to go through proper channels and override my medical hold. I'm sure the State Veterinary Board would be very interested in reviewing that decision. Boyd's facade of civility cracked. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Doctor. I can make one phone call and have your license. Make your calls, Hollis interrupted calmly. In the meantime, I have patients to attend to. He turned his back on them, returning to check on Reva and her puppies. This isn't over, Marla hissed. You're risking everything. Your career, the shelter's funding. No, Hollis said, not looking up from his examination. I'm doing my job. The real risk would be failing to protect these animals from further exploitation. Lark moved to stand beside him, her presence a quiet declaration of solidarity. After a tense moment, they heard the click of Marla's heels retreating, followed by Boyd's heavier footsteps and the slam of a distant door. They'll be back, Lark said softly, reaching down to stroke Reva's head. I know, Hollis replied, checking the newest set of vital signs. But by then, we'll have even more documentation. And I'm not backing down. They worked in focused silence, continuing their meticulous care and record-keeping. Both knew they had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But watching Reva tenderly, nurturing her struggling puppies, neither regretted their stand. The morning sun finally broke through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. In the whelping box, 5 tiny lives fought to survive, unaware they had become the catalyst for a much larger battle. Hollis and Lark remained at their posts, defenders transformed by conscience into reluctant warriors. The early morning sun filtered through the shelter's high windows, casting long shadows across the intake desk where Dr. Hollis Renton sat hunched over stacks of records. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but determination kept him alert. Next to him, empty coffee cups formed a scattered timeline of his investigation. There's definitely a pattern here, he muttered, spreading out intake forms across the desk. His finger traced down columns of dates and descriptions, connecting invisible dots that made his stomach turn. Lark Benning leaned over his shoulder, her presence steady and reassuring. What are you seeing? Look at these intake dates. Hollis pulled out several forms, arranging them in chronological order. Every 3 months, like clockwork, we get stray German shepherds brought in, all traced back to Ellery Ridge Kennel through microchips, all claimed within 48 hours. Lark's eyes widened as she studied the papers. That's not normal shelter procedure. Most legitimate breeders would never let their dogs end up here repeatedly. Exactly. Hollis reached for another folder. And here's the kicker. All females, all around 2 years old, all supposedly escaped from their homes. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they worked, the morning quiet broken only by the distant barking of dogs starting their day. Lark pulled up a chair, her movements careful as she balanced another stack of records. I can check other shelters, she offered, already reaching for the phone. If this is what we think it is, Hollis nodded grimly. A breeding pipeline, using shelters to hide pregnant females until they deliver, then reclaiming them before anyone asks questions. For the next 2 hours, they worked in focused silence. Lark made calls to neighboring facilities, her voice professional but probing, as she requested information about similar cases. Hollis constructed a timeline, mapping out each suspicious intake and release. Hollis. Lark's voice carried a note of urgency. Riverside Animal Control reports 3 similar cases in the past year. Pine Valley, 2. All German shepherds, all claimed by Ellery Ridge representatives. He pushed back from the desk, running a hand through his disheveled hair. They're using multiple shelters to avoid suspicion, spreading out the evidence. And look at this. Lark brought over her notebook, filled with careful notes. The timing matches perfectly with your theory about breeding cycles. These dogs disappear from Ellery Ridge just before they're due, show up at different shelters as strays, then get reclaimed after delivery. The picture emerging made Hollis's professional calm crack. They're deliberately breeding double merles, using public shelters as free whelping stations, probably cooking the books to hide the puppies that don't survive. "We need to report this," Lark said firmly, her earlier hesitation replaced by resolve. "This isn't just about Reva anymore. It's systematic animal abuse." Hollis reached for the phone, dialing the number for animal control enforcement. After a brief conversation, he was connected to Deputy Keen Rourke. The deputy arrived within the hour, his presence filling the small office with careful authority. He stood examining their evidence wall, where Hollis and Lark had mapped out the connection between cases. "That's quite a theory you're building, Doctor." "Renton," Rourke said, his tone neutral but attentive. "Boyd Ellery has a lot of friends in this county." "I know." Hollis met the deputy's steady gaze. "But these records don't lie. 5 double merle puppies, born last night, all from a dog that supposedly escaped from his kennel. It's not natural, Deputy. It's deliberate breeding for profit, using genetic defects to produce valuable coat colors." Rourke picked up one of the intake forms, studying it carefully. "And you say you've found similar patterns at other shelters?" Lark stepped forward, offering her notebook. "Yes, sir. I've documented 17 cases across 3 counties in the past 18 months, all following the same pattern." The deputy's professional skepticism began to shift as he reviewed their evidence. He asked pointed questions, made careful notes, and examined the medical records from Reva's delivery. "This kind of operation would need inside help," he observed, looking up from the papers. "Someone managing the paperwork, keeping things quiet." "We know," Hollis said quietly, exchanging a glance with Lark. "But right now, our priority is stopping the abuse and protecting these animals." Rourke nodded slowly, closing his notebook. "You've done good work here, both of you. This is more than just coincidence." He straightened his uniform jacket. "I'll need copies of everything you've gathered, and I want full documentation of those puppies' conditions, photos, medical reports, everything." "Already prepared," Lark said, handing him a thick folder. "We've been documenting everything since last night." "Smart." Rourke tucked the folder under his arm. "Keep this quiet for now. If Ellery's running a scheme this big, he won't take kindly to investigation. I'll start formal interviews today, but until then, watch your backs." Hollis felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Not completely, but enough to breathe easier. "Thank you, Deputy. We weren't sure anyone would listen." "That's what I'm here for." Rourke's expression softened slightly. "Not everyone can buy their way out of cruelty charges. Just keep those puppies safe and healthy. They're our best evidence." After the deputy left, Hollis and Lark stood in the quiet office, surrounded by the paper trail of their discovery. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming the room and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "We did it," Lark said softly, her hand finding Hollis's arm. "We actually found someone who believes us." Hollis covered her hand with his own, drawing strength from her touch. "This is just the beginning. Ellery won't go down without a fight. Then we'll fight harder." Her voice carried steel beneath its gentleness. "Those dogs deserve justice. All of them." They began carefully organizing their evidence, making backup copies of everything. The shelter was waking up around them, staff arriving for the morning shift, dogs being fed and walked. But in their small office, Hollis and Lark had created a fortress of truth, built from paper and determination. "We should check on Reva and the puppies," Hollis said, gathering the last of their files. "They'll need their morning assessment." Lark nodded, already heading for the door. "I'll get the camera. We need to document every detail now." As they walked together through the shelter's corridors, Hollis felt the weight of their discovery settling into something like purpose. They had moved beyond suspicion into action, beyond individual concern into coordinated resistance. The evidence was clear, the alliance was formed, and for the first time since Reva's desperate midnight delivery, Hollis felt the power of having others stand beside him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A veterinarian, a vet tech, and a deputy, united against the corruption that had hidden in plain sight for too long. The evening sky darkened prematurely as heavy clouds rolled in, casting long shadows across the county shelter's worn exterior. Dr. Hollis Renton sat at his cramped desk, poring over intake records while Lark Benning cross-referenced data from neighboring facilities on her tablet. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. "Look at this pattern," Hollis said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Every time Ellery Ridge reports a stray, it's always a breeding-age female. And the timing." He trailed off as the fluorescent lights above flickered ominously. Lark leaned over his shoulder, her face etched with concern. "And they always disappear right before they'd be due for spaying. I can't believe we missed this for so long." Thunder crashed overhead, making them both jump. The lights flickered again, then went out completely, plunging the office into darkness. Emergency lights cast an eerie glow through the hallways. "The backup generator should kick in," Hollis said, already reaching for his flashlight. "But we need to check on Reva and the puppies. The incubator." A loud crash from the direction of the kennel area cut him off. Hollis's heart rate spiked as he heard the distinct sound of breaking glass. "Someone's breaking in," Lark whispered, her eyes wide with fear. They hurried toward the whelping room, moving as quietly as possible through the dim hallways. The emergency lights cast strange shadows, and the storm's fury seemed to intensify with each step. As they approached, they heard low voices and the scraping of boots on tile. Hollis's hand trembled slightly as he pushed open the door to the whelping area. Two large men in dark clothes and ski masks were already inside, one reaching for the carrier containing Reva, while the other moved toward the makeshift puppy enclosure. "Stop right there." Hollis's voice carried more authority than he felt. "Step away from those dogs." The larger of the two men turned, his mask doing little to hide his menacing posture. "Walk away, Doc. This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't." Hollis planted himself between the intruders and the animals, his heart pounding but his stance firm. "These dogs are under medical hold. Nobody's taking them anywhere." The first man lunged forward, catching Hollis off guard. Strong hands grabbed his shoulders and slammed him hard against the wall. Pain exploded through his back as he hit the floor, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs. Lark screamed, but instead of running, she dove toward the puppy enclosure. "You can't move them!" she shouted, her voice high with panic. "They'll die without proper care." The second intruder grabbed for her, but she was quicker, snatching up the closest puppy and cradling it protectively. "These are double merles," she continued, backing away. "They need constant monitoring and temperature control." Thunder boomed again, and through his daze, Hollis could see Reva growing increasingly agitated in her carrier, her protective instincts clearly rising. The first man reached for the carrier handle, but Reva's warning growl gave him pause. Hollis struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain shooting through his back. "You want them? You'll have to go through me first." His voice was rough but determined. The second man advanced menacingly, but a new sound cut through the storm's chaos. Police sirens, growing closer by the second. "Shit," the first man muttered. "We need to go. Now." They backed away from the carriers, their body language shifting from aggressive to anxious. The larger man pointed at Hollis. "This isn't over." The two fled through the broken window, disappearing into the storm just as red and blue lights began flashing in the parking lot. Hollis sagged against the wall, his breathing ragged. Lark was already in motion, checking each puppy with trembling hands. "We need to keep them warm," she said, her voice shaky but focused. "The power's still out. The incubator isn't working." Together, they quickly improvised. Lark gathered blankets while Hollis found hot water bottles from the medical supplies. They created a nest of warmth, carefully monitoring each tiny body for signs of distress. "You okay?" Lark asked softly, noticing how Hollis winced as he moved. "I'll live," he managed, though his back screamed in protest. "The dogs are what matter right now." Deputy Keen Rourke arrived minutes later, looking grim as he surveyed the scene. His flashlight beam caught the broken glass, the scattered supplies, and the makeshift puppy warming station they'd created. "Got a call about suspicious activity," he said, notepad already in hand. "Want to tell me what happened here?" as Hollis recounted the break. Another officer approached with a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this," she said to Rourke. Security footage from the gas station across the street about an hour before the break-in. The tablet's screen showed grainy but clear footage of the station's lot. There, partially illuminated by the fluorescent lights, stood Marla Quaid, the shelter director, in deep conversation with Boyd Ellery. Money clearly changed hands before they parted ways. Hollis felt sick to his stomach. "That's from tonight?" Rourke nodded slowly. "Timestamp confirms it. Looks like your suspicions about Ellery weren't just about the dogs." Lark's hand found Hollis's arm, squeezing gently. "What do we do now?" "Now," Rourke said, his expression hardening, "we build a case. Tonight wasn't just about animal cruelty anymore. We're looking at breaking and entering, assault, conspiracy." He paused, looking directly at Hollis. "You sure you want to pursue this? Ellery's got connections, money, influence." Hollis looked down at the tiny puppies, then at Reva, who had finally settled enough to nurse her litter in their makeshift warm nest. His back ached, and he could feel a bruise forming where he'd hit the wall, but his resolve had never been stronger. "Those men were willing to risk these puppies' lives just to cover their tracks," he said quietly. "They're not going to stop unless someone stops them. I took an oath to prevent animal suffering. I'm not backing down now." The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would shake the foundations of Boyd Ellery's carefully constructed empire of cruelty. As Hollis watched Lark tenderly checking each puppy's vitals, he knew they'd crossed a line tonight. There was no going back now. The morning after the break-in, Dr. Hollis Renton's hands trembled as he sorted through a stack of dog registration papers. His bruised ribs ached with each breath, a painful reminder of the previous night's violence. The shelter's examination room felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress they needed to defend. "Look at this," he said, holding up a yellow document to Lark Benning. She leaned in closer, her coffee forgotten on the metal exam table. Reva's original registration lists her owner as Margaret Ellery. Lark's eyebrows furrowed. "Boyd's sister?" "Yes, but here's the thing." Hollis pulled up a county records search on his computer. Margaret Ellery died 3 years ago. Yet somehow, she's still registering dogs. "That's impossible." Lark picked up the paper, studying it closely. Her hands were steady, but Hollis noticed the dark circles under her eyes. Neither of them had slept much after the attack. Not impossible, just criminal. Hollis pushed back from his desk, wincing at the movement. Boyd's been using his dead sister's name to hide violations. When a breeding dog shows health issues or temperament problems, the registration transfers to Margaret. Then the dog conveniently escapes and ends up in shelters like ours. Lark began spreading more papers across the examination table. "I've been going through Marla's approval records. Look at these intake dates." She pointed to a series of entries. "Every time we get one of Boyd's problem dogs, there's a large donation to the shelter within 48 hours. And then the dogs disappear again," Hollis added, his voice tight with anger. "Back to Boyd's kennel through different channels. He's using the shelter system to launder his breeding stock." Deputy Keen Rourke arrived an hour later, his uniform crisp, despite the early hour. He studied the evidence they'd gathered, his expression growing more serious with each document. "This is methodical," he said, laying out the pattern. "The falsified registrations, the shelter donations, the timing of transfers, it's not just animal cruelty anymore. We're looking at fraud, document falsification, and possibly money laundering." Hollis nodded, pulling up more records on his computer. "I've tracked similar patterns at 3 other shelters in neighboring counties. Boyd moves the dogs around, using different names and documentation each time, but the genetic markers don't lie." He showed Rourke photos of Reva's puppies. "These double merle characteristics, they're the result of deliberately breeding 2 merle-coated dogs together. It's cheaper than proper genetic testing, but it creates serious health issues. And guarantees a certain number of pure white puppies," Lark added bitterly. "The snow shepherds that make Boyd so much money." Rourke examined the photos carefully. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on the records we've found, at least 5 years," Hollis said. maybe longer. Marla's been helping cover it up the whole time. She processes the intakes, signs off on the transfers, and makes sure no one asks too many questions. "Show me everything," Rourke said, pulling up a chair. "Start from the beginning." For the next 2 hours, they laid out the entire operation. Hollis explained the genetic science behind double merle breeding and its devastating effects. Lark mapped out the paper trail of donations and transfers, showing how Boyd used the shelter system to hide his breeding program. "He's careful," Rourke observed, studying their evidence board. "Uses different veterinarians, different shelters, different names on the paperwork, but it all connects back to Ellery Ridge Kennel. The money's the key," Lark said, pointing to her financial analysis. "Every time a problem dog comes in, there's a donation. Every time a valuable puppy disappears, there's another payment. It's all documented in the shelter's books, but Marla coded everything as general donations." Hollis felt a chill as the full scope of the operation became clear. This wasn't just one wealthy man cutting corners. It was a calculated system of abuse, using shelter resources and staff to hide criminal breeding practices. "What about other witnesses?" Rourke asked, making notes in his official notebook. "Most of the shelter staff only see pieces of it," Lark explained. "They handle intakes or transfers, but never the whole picture. Marla makes sure of that." "And the people who do know," Hollis added grimly. "They're either paid off or scared silent. After last night, I understand why." Rourke's expression hardened at the mention of the break-in. "That was a mistake on their part. Assault and attempted theft give us leverage we didn't have before, combined with these records." He gestured at their evidence. "I think we can get a warrant." "How soon?" Hollis asked, thinking of Reva and her puppies, still vulnerable in their medical ward. "I'll take this to the judge today," Rourke said, gathering the most crucial documents. "We'll need your official statements, and be ready to testify if it goes to court. This isn't just about saving a few dogs anymore. We're looking at systematic criminal activity." Lark touched Hollis's arm gently. "Are you sure you want to pursue this? After what happened last night?" Hollis looked at the photos of Reva's puppies, their pale, defective forms a testament to years of calculated cruelty. "I took an oath to prevent animal suffering," he said quietly. "Boyd's been running this operation for years, using people's trust in shelters to hide what he's doing. It has to stop." "I'll post an officer here 24/7 until we serve the warrant," Rourke promised, standing to leave. "Document everything. Don't let anyone pressure you to transfer those dogs. And be careful, people like Boyd Ellery aren't used to being challenged." After Rourke left, Hollis and Lark stood looking at their evidence board. Years of suffering and corruption laid bare in paper and photographs. "I should have seen it sooner," Lark said softly. "All those donations, all those convenient transfers. I helped process some of them." "We all missed it," Hollis assured her. "Boyd built this system carefully, used people's good intentions against them. But now we know." He looked at her with determination. "And we're going to stop it." They spent the rest of the morning securing copies of every document, storing backups both digitally and in physical form. The weight of what they'd uncovered pressed down on them, but with it came a sense of purpose. They weren't just treating symptoms anymore, they were fighting the disease itself. In the medical ward, Reva watched them with tired eyes, her puppies nursing quietly. Hollis checked their vital signs, noting small improvements. They were fighters, these little ones, despite everything stacked against them. "We're going to make this right," he promised them softly, "no matter what it takes." The afternoon sun slanted through the shelter windows as Hollis, Lark, and Deputy Rourke gathered in the small conference room. Empty coffee cups littered the table, surrounded by stacks of organized papers and medical records. The air hummed with focused energy, a stark contrast to the fear and chaos of recent days. "Here's what we've compiled," Lark said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Her fingers, usually steady during medical procedures, trembled slightly as she opened it. Every intake connected to Ellery Ridge Kennel for the past 3 years. Dates, conditions, supposed circumstances. The pattern's crystal clear once you know what to look for. Rourke nodded, examining the meticulously organized documents. "This is good work, Clean enough for a judge to follow. I've already started the paperwork for surveillance authorization. Hollis leaned forward, his exhausted face brightening with purpose. What's our next step? We set the trap, Rourke explained, pulling out his own notebook. Make it look like the pressure's working. We'll announce that the medical hold is lifting, feed the information through channels we know are compromised. When Boyd moves to collect the dogs, we'll be ready, Lark finished, a hint of steel in her voice. Hollis stood, pacing the small room. I've already upgraded security in the medical ward. New locks, cameras covering every angle. The footage feeds directly to an off-site server. He paused, running a hand through his disheveled hair. But we need to make it look just vulnerable enough to be tempting. That's the idea, Rourke confirmed. We make Boyd think he's got another easy mark, the same system he's been exploiting for years. Lark spread out a timeline she'd created, color-coded and detailed. I've documented every donation that coincided with suspicious transfers. The amounts increase whenever there's pushback, starting small but reaching up to $10,000 for some cases. Classic escalation pattern, Rourke observed. He's gotten bolder because it keeps working. Hollis returned to the table, examining the security plans. What about Reva and the puppies? We can't risk their safety. Already handled, Rourke assured him. We'll have plainclothes officers in place before we announce anything. Plus, I've arranged for a specialized transport unit to be on standby, legitimate rescue partners ready to move them to a secure facility if needed. The group worked through lunch, refining their strategy. Lark organized medical records into clear, chronological evidence packets. Each one told part of the story. Deliberate breeding of dogs with known genetic issues, systematic abuse hidden behind legitimate-looking paperwork, a web of deception that had gone unchallenged for too long. The key is timing, Rourke explained, sketching out a rough timeline. We need enough officers in place before word gets out about the medical hold being lifted. But it has to look natural, not like we're expecting trouble. Hollis nodded, thinking of the scared staff who'd been unwittingly part of Boyd's scheme. What about the other shelter workers? Limited information, Lark suggested. Just enough so they stay safe, not enough to tip our hand. Most of them will be relieved to know something's finally being done. They broke briefly to check on the animals. Hollis performed quick examinations while Lark documented everything with photographs and detailed notes. The puppies were gaining strength, despite their challenges. Reva watched them with tired but trusting eyes, her maternal instincts strong despite her own depleted condition. Back in the conference room, they finalized the security arrangements. Rourke had positioned cameras to cover every possible approach to the shelter. Silent alarms would alert them to any unauthorized entry. Most importantly, they had a clear chain of evidence showing Boyd's systematic abuse of the shelter system. One thing's still bothering me, Hollis said, reviewing their plans. What if he doesn't come himself? What if he sends someone else, like last night? That's why we're documenting everything, Rourke explained. Whether he shows up personally or sends others, we'll have evidence of his involvement. The surveillance will give us the connection we need. Lark added another page to her dossier. And we've got the financial records showing his pattern. The donations, the timing, everything that proves this isn't just a coincidence. It's more than just catching him in the act, Rourke said. We're exposing the whole operation. Every fake transfer, every covered-up case of abuse, every time he used money to make problems disappear. The afternoon wore on as they refined their strategy. Lark created backup copies of all their evidence, storing them in multiple secure locations. Hollis double-checked the medical ward's new security measures, making sure they appeared normal to casual observation while providing real protection. Tomorrow morning, Rourke decided, checking his watch. We'll start spreading the word that the medical hold is being lifted. Make it look like pressure from above finally worked. Hollis felt a mix of anxiety and determination. And then we wait. And then we wait, Rourke confirmed. But this time, we're ready. As they prepared to separate for the night, Lark gathered their consolidated evidence into secure folders. Her hands were steady now, her earlier nervousness replaced by resolute purpose. They had transformed from victims to hunters, turning Boyd's own system against him. Get some rest, Rourke advised. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Looking at their carefully laid plans, Hollis felt hope rising for the first time in days. They had evidence, they had support, and most importantly, they had truth on their side. Boyd Ellery's long reign of cruelty was about to meet its match. The search warrant execution began at dawn. Deputy Rourke led his team through Ellery Ridge Kennel's pristine front office, past the showcase areas where prize-winning dogs were displayed to impressed clients. But Hollis knew the truth lay deeper. "Check every door," Rourke ordered his officers, "even if it looks like a closet." They moved methodically through the building. The public areas were immaculate. Gleaming kennels, fresh water bowls, and spotless floors. Everything a legitimate breeding operation should be. But Hollis noticed something odd about the wall measurements between rooms. "There's space missing," he said, running his hand along the painted drywall. "This section should extend another 15 feet based on the building's exterior." Lark stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Look at the baseboards. They're newer here, different from the rest." "Rourke!" signaled 2 officers forward. They located the hidden seam and, with careful pressure, the false wall swung inward on concealed hinges. The stench hit them first, ammonia-sharp and thick with neglect. Emergency lights clicked on, revealing a nightmare. Double rows of stacked cages lined the walls of a windowless room. Inside, white German shepherds, huddled in cramped spaces, many showing the telltale signs of double merle breeding. Clouded eyes, malformed ears, and trembling bodies. "Oh God," Lark whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "There must be 20 dogs in here." Hollis moved quickly, his veterinary instincts taking over. He began checking the animals one by one, documenting their conditions. Many were pregnant females, others recently whelped. All showed signs of prolonged confinement and minimal care. "Over here!" an officer called out, holding up shredded papers from a waste bin. They were trying to destroy records. Rourke pulled on evidence gloves and began piecing together the torn documents. Sales receipts, breeding schedules, medical records, or lack thereof. They must have started shredding when they heard we were coming. In a locked desk drawer, they found what they were looking for: a leather-bound ledger filled with neat columns of figures and codes. Lark leaned in, her eyes widening as she decoded the entries. "Snow pups. That's what he called the double merles," she explained, pointing to the notation. "Look at these prices. $5,000 each for the ones that survived." He was making a fortune off their suffering. Hollis felt a cold anger as he examined a particularly weak mother dog. He knew exactly what he was doing. Breeding for the white coat, knowing half the puppies would have severe health issues. The ones that lived became profit. The ones that didn't. "We found a burial area behind the building," an officer reported from the doorway. "It's extensive." The evidence mounted as they continued their search. Hidden cameras revealed the true scale of Boyd's operation. Dozens of dogs cycled through the secret room, their puppies sold through a network of fake rescues and underground buyers. The healthy ones commanded premium prices as rare white shepherds. The impaired ones disappeared. Lark worked systematically, photographing everything and matching kennel records to the ledger entries. Her hands were steady now, anger replacing her earlier nervousness. "He used the shelter transfers to hide the worst cases," she said. Made it look like he was doing a public service, taking in strays. "While using the donations to buy silence," Rourke added, examining financial records. "This goes back years. Every time someone asked questions, money changed hands." Hollis watched as animal control vehicles arrived to transport the rescued dogs. Each carrier held a living testament to Boyd's cruelty, and to the system that had protected him for so long. But now they had proof. Undeniable, documented evidence of everything they'd suspected. "We'll need to set up emergency housing," he said, already planning. "These dogs will need specialized care, especially the pregnant ones." Lark nodded, hope beginning to shine through her professional demeanor. "I know some rescue groups that specialize in special needs dogs. They'll help once the legal holds are cleared." The morning stretched into afternoon as they processed the scene. Every new discovery added to their case. Hidden financial records, faked health certificates, correspondence with corrupt officials. Boyd's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing the rot beneath. "Document everything," Rorke reminded them. "Every cage, every record, every injury. We're not just building a case against Boyd. We're exposing everyone who helped him get away with this." Standing in that hidden room, surrounded by evidence of such calculated cruelty, Hollis felt the weight of vindication. Everything they'd risked, their careers, their safety, their reputations, had led to this moment. The truth was finally coming to light. Looking at the rescued dogs being carefully loaded into transport vehicles, Lark allowed herself a small smile. "They're going to be safe now," she said softly. "All of them." The evidence bags filled up. The damning ledger, hundreds of photographs, veterinary records showing years of deliberate breeding for profit, regardless of suffering. Each piece told part of a story that could no longer be hidden or denied. The fluorescent lights of the county courthouse buzzed overhead as Hollis sat on the hard wooden bench, his shoulders tense with anticipation. The evidence against Boyd Ellery seemed rock solid: photographs, medical records, and that damning ledger filled with proof of his Snow Shepherd breeding operation. Lark sat beside him, her usual energy subdued by the gravity of the moment. District Attorney Phillips stood at the prosecution table, his navy suit crisp and authoritative, but something in his posture made Hollis's stomach twist. The DA kept shuffling through papers, shaking his head slightly. Boyd Ellery lounged in his chair at the defense table, wearing an expensive ranch coat that probably cost more than Hollis made in a month. His attorney, a sharp-featured woman in designer glasses, whispered something that made Boyd smirk. "Your Honor," the DA began, his voice carrying a note that made Hollis's heart sink. After careful review of the evidence gathered during the search of Ellery Ridge Kennel, the state must regrettably move to dismiss all charges. The words hit Hollis like a physical blow. Beside him, Lark made a small sound of distress. "The foundation of this case," Phillips continued, "rests on allegations of unauthorized retention of animals that were, in fact, legally transferred. Director Quaid's properly executed transfer forms show clear authorization for Mr. Ellery to reclaim his animals at any time." "Marla, of course." Hollis should have known she'd covered her tracks. His hands clenched into fists as he remembered all those pre-signed forms she'd kept ready in her desk. "Furthermore," the DA went on, "the subsequent search was predicated on these allegedly unauthorized retentions. Without proper cause, the evidence gathered becomes fruit of the poisonous tree." Boyd's attorney stood smoothly. "Your Honor, we move for immediate return of all property seized during this illegal search, including the animals currently held at the county shelter." The judge, a tired-looking man with steel-gray hair, nodded. "Motion to dismiss granted. Mr. Ellery is to have his property returned within 24 hours. Property. They were calling living creatures property." Hollis felt sick. Boyd turned in his chair, fixing Hollis with a triumphant stare. "Looking forward to collecting what's mine, Doctor," he drawled, just loud enough to carry. Outside the courthouse, Deputy Rorke caught up with them, his face dark with fury. "This is wrong," he growled. "We all know what's happening in that kennel." "Knowing isn't enough," Hollis said numbly. "Not without admissible evidence." Lark wiped angry tears from her eyes. "What about the puppies? We can't just hand them back to him." "We don't have a choice," Hollis said, the words tasting bitter. "Not legally." His phone buzzed, an email from the shelter board. He opened it, already knowing what it would say. 3 major donors had withdrawn their pledged support, citing controversy and mismanagement of the Ellery situation. "They're pulling funding," he told the others, his voice hollow. "Without those donations, the shelter can barely operate as it is," Lark finished. Boyd emerged from the courthouse, walking past them with deliberate slowness. "I'll be by first thing tomorrow," he said, pausing to straighten his expensive coat. "Try not to lose any more of my valuable breeding stock before then." Hollis felt the weight of defeat, pressing down on his shoulders. Everything they'd worked for, all the evidence they'd gathered, all the risks they'd taken, none of it mattered. Boyd's money and connections had won out. Back at the shelter, the atmosphere was heavy with despair. Staff moved quietly through their tasks, avoiding eye contact. Everyone knew what the loss of funding would mean. Fewer resources, fewer animals helped, maybe even layoffs. Hollis stood in the whelping room, watching Reva nurse her puppies. They were growing stronger every day, despite their genetic challenges. The white mother dog looked up at him with trusting eyes, and his throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I tried." Lark appeared in the doorway, her usual bounce gone from her step. "Marla wants to see you," she said quietly. "Board's calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning." He nodded, too drained to even feel angry anymore. "They'll probably want my resignation." "You did the right thing," Lark insisted, but her voice wavered. "Did I?" Hollis ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Look where it got us. Boyd walks free, the shelter loses funding, and these dogs—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows in the small room. Outside, the regular sounds of the shelter continued. Barking dogs, meowing cats, the squeak of cartwheels on linoleum. But it all felt different now, tainted by the knowledge of their failure. Hollis checked his phone again, 3 more emails from worried volunteers, asking what would happen to their programs without donor support. The shelter's carefully balanced budget was about to collapse like a house of cards. "Maybe we could find homes for them quickly," Lark suggested, but they both knew it was impossible. The puppies were too young, too medically fragile. "Boyd's too smart for that," Hollis said. "He'll be here first thing, probably with police escort to prevent any misunderstandings." He walked to his office, each step feeling heavier than the last. The evidence board they'd created still hung on his wall, photos, documents, connection maps all carefully arranged. All useless now. He started taking it down, piece by piece, dropping everything into his trash bin. A knock at his door made him turn. Marla stood there, her sharp suit somehow making her look smaller than usual. Her practiced smile was gone, replaced by naked anxiety. "The board chairman called," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "They're concerned about liability, about our relationship with major donors." "You mean they're afraid of Boyd?" Hollis translated flatly. Marla flinched. "They're afraid of the shelter closing, without funding." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "The morning meeting is at 8 o'clock sharp. Please bring a formal statement about the incident." "You mean my resignation letter?" She didn't deny it, just turned and walked away, her heels clicking rapidly on the floor. Hollis sat heavily in his chair, staring at the now bare wall. Years of work, of building trust with staff and volunteers, of fighting to give every animal a chance, all crumbling because he dared to challenge someone with money and influence. His computer chimed with another email. This one was from Boyd's attorney, formally demanding the return of all animals and threatening additional legal action if there was any delay. The list of animals included not just Reva and her puppies, but 3 other dogs Hollis had placed on medical hold, suspecting they came from the same breeding operation. He thought about those dogs, about all the others that had passed through Boyd's kennel. How many had suffered? How many more would suffer now that Boyd knew he was untouchable? The light outside his window was fading, evening settling over the shelter. Soon the night staff would arrive, going through their routines of feeding and cleaning. Tomorrow, Boyd would come to collect his property. Tomorrow, the board would accept his resignation. Tomorrow, everything would go back to the way it had been, with money and power deciding which laws mattered and which could be ignored. Hollis stood up, his movements mechanical. He needed to prepare the transfer paperwork, update medical records, write his statement for the board. But first, he walked back to the whelping room. He owed Reva and her puppies that much at least. One more checkup, one more moment of care before he had to hand them back to the man who had deliberately bred them for profit, knowing the suffering it would cause. The weight of defeat pressed down on him, heavier than ever. He had tried to stand up for what was right, and he had failed. The system, with all its flaws and compromises, had won. Boyd had won. In the whelping room, Reva wagged her tail at his approach, still trusting, still believing in human kindness. Hollis knelt beside her, checking each puppy with gentle hands, knowing it would be the last time. Tomorrow they would go back to Boyd's kennel, and there was nothing he could do about it. The sense of hopelessness was complete. He had lost everything: the case, his job, his ability to protect the animals in his care. Boyd would continue his cruel breeding operation, probably more boldly than before, knowing that money and influence could shield him from consequences. As darkness fell outside, Hollis remained in the whelping room, watching over the dogs he had failed to save, surrounded by the ruins of his attempt to stand up for what was right. The night stretched dark and hollow across the county shelter. Dr. Hollis Renton sat slumped at his desk, staring at the scattered case files that now meant nothing. The prosecutor's dismissal echoed in his mind like a cruel joke. All their careful work, rendered worthless by Marla's pre-signed forms. A soft whimper from the whelping room caught his attention. Reva and her puppies needed their evening check, even if everything else had fallen apart. He pushed himself up, his body heavy with defeat. The crash came without warning. Glass exploded inward as something burst through the clinic window, trailing orange flame. Hollis ducked instinctively as the device hit the floor and erupted, spewing thick grey smoke that instantly began filling the narrow hallway. "No!" he shouted, lunging toward the whelping room. His eyes burned as the acrid smoke pursued him. The fire alarm shrieked to life, its piercing wail mixing with the frightened barks echoing through the shelter. He crashed through the door to find Reva already on her feet, hackles raised as she stood over her whimpering puppies. The smoke was seeping under the door, curling around their feet like ghostly fingers. "We've got to get you out," Hollis coughed, dropping to his knees beside the whelping box. He could barely see through the thickening haze. His hands found the first puppy, tiny and trembling. The door burst open again. "Hollis!" Lark's voice cut through the chaos. She appeared like a shadow in the smoke, already pulling her lab coat over her nose and mouth. "Help me with the puppies," he called back, passing her the first one. "There's a firebomb we need to evacuate." They worked frantically, gathering the helpless newborns. Hollis could hear the crackle of flames from the hallway now, feel the heat building. Reva paced anxiously, torn between following her puppies and staying with the ones still in the box. Another explosion rocked the building. Closer this time. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into smoky darkness broken only by the orange glow of approaching fire. "That's 4," Lark called out, clutching the rescued puppies to her chest. "One more!" Hollis reached for the last puppy just as a section of ceiling crashed down in the hallway. Sparks and burning debris scattered across the floor, igniting everything they touched. The puppy in his hands wasn't moving. "Go!" he shouted to Lark. "Get them out! I'll be right! Behind you!" She hesitated for just a moment before running for the emergency exit, Reva following close behind. Hollis hunched over the limp puppy, shielding it with his body as another wave of heat rolled over them. The tiny creature wasn't breathing. "Don't you dare," he muttered, starting chest compressions with 2 fingers. "Don't you dare give up now." Smoke burned his lungs with every breath, but he kept going, desperately trying to force life back into the tiny body. The fire was in the room now, consuming the far wall with frightening speed. Sweat ran down his face, mixing with tears from the smoke. Still, he wouldn't leave. Not without this last innocent life. Finally, miraculously, the puppy gave a weak cough. Its chest rose and fell with a shuddering breath. Hollis clutched it close, wrapping it in his lab coat as he stumbled toward the exit. The night air hit him like a blessing. He dropped to his knees in the parking lot, gasping and coughing as fire trucks wailed in the distance. Lark was there instantly, taking the puppy and checking it over, while other shelter staff rushed around them with fire extinguishers. "It's breathing," she assured him, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved it, Hollis. You saved them all." He couldn't speak yet, his lungs still burning. But as his vision cleared, he saw Reva and all 5 puppies safe in the back of Lark's car, protected from the chaos. Something broke inside him, then relief mixed with rage at how close they'd come to losing everything. "This was Boyd," he rasped. "He's trying to destroy the evidence." Lark's face crumpled with guilt. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly, helping him to his feet. They moved away from the growing crowd of firefighters and police, finding a quiet corner by her car. "I used to help Marla," she confessed, her words tumbling out in a rush. With the files, the transfers. I didn't know what it was really for, but I helped cover Boyd's tracks. That's why the prosecutor could dismiss everything so easily, because I helped create those false papers. Hollis stared at her, trying to process this new blow through his smoke-addled mind. Why didn't you tell me? I was ashamed, she whispered. And scared. But seeing you risk your life in there, fighting for these animals while Boyd tries to burn it all down. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his eyes directly. I'll testify. About everything. The real dates, the altered records, all of it. I can't let them get away with this anymore. The flashing emergency lights painted her face in alternating red and blue as she spoke. Hollis saw the fear there, but also determination. She was choosing to stand with him, knowing it could cost her everything. It'll be dangerous, he warned her. Boyd's already shown how far he'll go. I know. She reached out and squeezed his hand. But you taught me something important sometimes. Doing what's right means standing your ground, no matter how scared you are. A paramedic approached, insisting on checking Hollis for smoke inhalation. As they led him toward the ambulance, he looked back at Lark. She was carefully tending to Reva and the puppies, her movements gentle but purposeful. The fire still raged behind them, but something else was burning now too. Hope, fragile but fierce, that truth might finally prevail. The night that should have destroyed them had instead forged something stronger. In the face of violence, they'd found courage. In the aftermath of betrayal, they'd discovered trust. And in the ashes of defeat, they'd uncovered a new path forward. One they would walk together, no matter what came next. Deputy Keen Rorker stood in the charred remains of the clinic, his flashlight beam cutting through the lingering smoke. The acrid smell of burnt plastic and melted medical equipment filled the air. Behind him, the crime scene unit photographed the broken window where the firebomb had crashed through, their camera, flashes illuminating the destruction in stark bursts. This wasn't random, Rourke said, his voice tight with controlled anger. This was a message. Doctor. Hollis Renton sat on an overturned supply bin, his scrubs still smudged with soot. The events of the night played over and over in his mind. The crash of breaking glass, the whoosh of flames, the terrified whimpers of the puppies as he'd shielded them with his own body. His hands still trembled slightly. Boyd's getting desperate, Hollis said quietly. He knows we're close to something. Rourke crouched down beside a melted plastic bin, examining the scorched floor. This is exactly what we needed. Attempted arson, endangered animals, assault on shelter staff. 2I. He's escalated from financial crimes to physical violence. No judge can ignore this. The deputy stood, brushing ash from his uniform pants. I'm bringing Marla in for questioning. Tonight. After this, she has to know she's on a sinking ship. Hollis looked up sharply. You think she'll talk? People like Marla survive by staying one step ahead, Rourke said. Right now, that means getting ahead of Boyd before he brings everything down around them. 3 hours later, Marla Quaid sat in a stark interview room at the sheriff's office, her usual polished appearance, showing signs of strain. Her hands fidgeted with a paper cup of cooling coffee as Rourke laid out crime scene photos on the table between them. Someone tried to burn down your shelter tonight, Marla, Rourke said evenly. Nearly killed Dr. Renton and those puppies. The same puppies Boyd's been so desperate to get his hands on. Marla's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. I had nothing to do with that. Nothing. Maybe not directly, Rourke agreed. But you've been covering for Boyd's operation for years, haven't you? Falsifying intake records, laundering his breeding stock through the shelter system. How long before he decides you're too much of a liability? The shelter directors, hands trembled, sloshing coffee onto the table. You don't understand. The shelter needs his donations. We'd have closed years ago without his support. Support bought with blood money from selling deliberately bred defective puppies, Rourke pushed. And now he's escalated to attempted murder. How much longer are you going to protect him? Marla's composure finally shattered. He'll kill me, she whispered. You don't know what he's capable of. We can protect you, Rourke said firmly. But only if you give us everything. Now. For a long moment, Marla sat frozen in indecision. Then something in her seemed to break. With shaking hands, she reached for her oversized purse. "I've kept records," she said quietly. "Insurance in case something happened." She pulled out a thick manila envelope. "It's all here. Contracts for the breeding pairs, cash pickup schedules, burner phone numbers he used for sales. I documented everything." Rourke carefully opened the envelope, examining the contents. His eyes widened slightly at what he found. "This is comprehensive." "I'm not stupid," Marla said bitterly. "I knew someday it would all fall apart. She swallowed hard. "I just didn't think he'd try to kill anyone." Over the next 2 hours, Marla detailed years of systematic abuse and fraud. She described how Boyd had first approached her with donations that seemed too good to be true, how the demands had grown gradually more sinister, how she'd justified each compromise as necessary for the shelter's survival. Her voice shook as she outlined the breeding program, deliberate pairings of double merle dogs to produce the valuable snow-white puppies that brought premium prices, despite their near-certain health defects. "He has a whole network," she explained. "Private buyers who don't ask questions, pet stores that look the other way. The money gets laundered through shell companies and shelter donations. It's why we could never trace it directly to him before." Rourke took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Marla finally fell silent, he pushed a formal statement form across the table. "I need you to write it all down," he said. "Every detail. Then we're going to set up a meeting." Marla's head snapped up. "What?" "No, I can't. We need to catch him in the act," Rourke explained. "Your testimony is powerful, but physical evidence of a transaction will make the case bulletproof. You'll set up a routine cash pickup, but this time we'll be watching." "He'll know something's wrong," Marla protested. "He's too careful." "Not if we give him what he wants most," a new voice said from the doorway. Hollis stood there, still in his smoke-stained scrubs. His quiet voice carried absolute conviction. "He wants those puppies. He's proven he'll do anything to get them, so we'll let him think he's finally going to get them." Rourke nodded slowly. "We use you to set up the meeting, Marla. Make him think you've finally pressured Hollis into releasing the dogs. He'll be desperate enough to come himself." "You want to use me as bait," Hollis said. "It wasn't a question. You'll be completely protected," Rourke assured him. "We'll have teams in place before he arrives. But yes, we need you there to make it convincing." Hollis didn't hesitate. "I'll do it. Whatever it takes to end this." Marla looked between them, then down at the statement form. With trembling fingers, she picked up the pen and began to write. Over the next hour, they carefully crafted the plan. Marla would contact Boyd using their usual channels, telling him she'd finally broken Hollis down. They would arrange a midnight meeting at the shelter's loading dock, private enough to seem legitimate, but with clear lines of sight for the surveillance team. "The key is making him think he's in control," Rourke explained. "He needs to believe this is his victory." Hollis nodded grimly. "He's arrogant enough to buy it. He thinks he's untouchable. That arrogance is what will bring him down," Rourke said. "But we have to play this exactly right. One mistake, and he'll slip through our fingers again." They spent another hour working through contingencies, mapping out positions and signals. Marla's hands steadied as she contributed details about Boyd's habits and patterns. By the time they finished, the first grey light of dawn was seeping through the windows. Rourke gathered the papers into an evidence envelope, sealing it carefully. "Get some rest," he told Hollis. "Tomorrow night, we end this." Hollis stood slowly, exhaustion evident in every line of his body, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Tomorrow night," he agreed. As they prepared to leave, Marla suddenly spoke up. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for everything. I should have stood up to him years ago." Hollis paused in the doorway. "It's not too late to do the right thing," he said. "That's what matters now." Marla nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Years of compromise and fear were written in those tears, but also, perhaps, the first glimpse of redemption. Rourke watched them go, then carefully locked away the evidence that would finally bring down Boyd Ellery's cruel empire. Tomorrow night would bring the confrontation they'd all been building toward. Justice was coming, but first they had to spring the trap. One final play to end it all. The deputy's hand rested briefly on his service weapon as he thought about what was coming. They had the evidence, they had the testimony, and now they had the perfect bait. Boyd's reign of cruelty was about to end one way or another. The old storage loft loomed against the darkening sky, its weathered boards creaking in the evening wind. Dr. Hollis Renton's footsteps echoed on the wooden stairs as he climbed to the second floor, his heart pounding against his ribs. The musty air filled his lungs, carrying the sharp scent of hay and decades of dust. He'd agreed to meet Boyd here, supposedly, to negotiate terms for Reva's return. The hidden wire beneath his jacket crackled softly, a constant reminder that Deputy Rorke and backup were positioned outside, waiting for Boyd to incriminate himself. The vast space stretched before him, shadows dancing between stacked crates and forgotten farm equipment. Shafts of fading sunlight cut through gaps in the wooden walls, creating golden bars across the floor. Hollis moved cautiously, each step calculated. "Right on time, Doctor." Boyd Ellery's voice boomed from behind a tower of hay bales. He emerged, his expensive ranch coat catching the light, but something was different in his stance, more predatory than prestigious now. In his right hand, he gripped a cattle prod, its metal tip glinting menacingly. Hollis felt his mouth go dry. This wasn't how the meet was supposed to go. "Boyd," he managed, keeping his voice steady. "I thought we were here to talk business." "Oh, we are." Boyd's smile didn't reach his eyes. 20 years of careful breeding. 20 years of perfecting those white coats that bring in top dollar. And you think you can destroy it all with your bleeding heart nonsense? He began circling Hollis, the cattle prod extended. "You don't understand bloodlines, Doctor. You don't understand what it takes to create perfection." "Perfection?" Hollis felt anger rising above his fear. "Those puppies are blind and deaf. Reva nearly died. You're not creating perfection, you're breeding suffering." Boyd's face twisted. "Collateral damage. For every defective one, I get 2 perfect snow-white shepherds that sell for 5 figures each. It's simple mathematics." "It's cruelty," Hollis said firmly, shifting his weight as Boyd moved closer. He needed to keep him talking, get the confession on tape. "How many litters have you destroyed to keep this quiet?" "Destroyed?" Boyd laughed harshly. "I'm creating art. Those pretty white coats that make rich women swoon, that's my signature. The weak ones, they're just the cost of doing business." He jabbed the air with the prod. "But you had to stick your nose where it didn't belong." Hollis caught movement in his peripheral vision, Rorke positioning himself near the loft entrance. "Just a few more moments. Is that why you tried to burn down the clinic? To hide your art?" "You should have backed off when Marla told you to," Boyd snarled. "Should have taken the hint when those boys paid you a visit. But no, you had to play hero." He lunged forward suddenly, the cattle prod crackling with electricity. Hollis barely managed to dodge, feeling the heat of it pass inches from his face. His elbow slammed into a wooden post as he stumbled backward. "The great Doctor Renton," Boyd mocked, advancing again. "Think you're better than me because you work in that filthy shelter? I built an empire. Those dogs are my property." Hollis saw his opening and took it. "They're evidence now, Boyd. And you just confessed to everything." Boyd's eyes widened as he realized his mistake. With a roar of rage, he charged, prod extended. Hollis didn't think, he just moved, tackling Boyd around the midsection. They crashed into a stack of crates, wood splintering around them. The impact sent them rolling toward the open hay door. Hollis felt empty air beneath him for one terrifying moment as his upper body tilted over the edge. Boyd's weight pushed him further, the ground 30 feet below swimming in his vision. "Freeze! Police!" Rorke's voice boomed through the loft. Strong hands grabbed Hollis's legs, hauling him back from the brink. He collapsed on the wooden floor, gasping, as Rorke and 2 other deputies swarmed Boyd. The cattle prod clattered away as they pinned him face down, cuffs clicking into place. "You're under arrest," Rorke announced, his knee firmly in Boyd's back. "For animal cruelty, attempted murder, arson, and whatever else we can stack on top." He looked at Hollis. "You okay, Doc?" Hollis nodded, still catching his breath. His hands were shaking, but a profound sense of relief washed over him. It was done. The prosecution was swift and decisive this time. With Marla's testimony, the recorded confession, and the mountain of evidence they'd gathered, Boyd's empire crumbled. The court seized his assets, directing them toward medical care for the animals he'd harmed. Riva's puppies underwent specialized surgeries, giving them a chance at better lives despite their genetic challenges. Weeks later, Hollis knelt on his living room floor, watching Riva play with her now healthy pups. She'd come so far from that stormy night, her coat glossy, her eyes bright with trust. The decision to adopt her had been easy. She'd claimed his heart long ago. "They're looking good," Lark said softly from the doorway. She carried 2 mugs of coffee, setting them on the table before joining him on the floor. One of the puppies immediately climbed into her lap, tail wagging. "They are," Hollis agreed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The specialist says they're exceeding expectations." Lark leaned against his shoulder, her presence warm and reassuring, just like their new clinic will. He smiled, thinking of the plans they'd drawn up together. The old Thompson building downtown would soon become Haven Hills Veterinary, their vision of an ethics-first practice where care came before profit, and no animal would be turned away. "We're really doing this," he mused, watching Riva gently nose one of her pups back toward its siblings. "We are," Lark confirmed, squeezing his hand. "Together." The setting sun painted the room in soft colors, and Hollis felt the rightness of it all settle into his bones. He'd entered this fight as a quiet shelter vet, determined to protect one mother dog and her pups. He'd emerged as something more, a defender, a healer, and now, with Lark by his side, a builder of something better. The puppies tumbled and played, their joy unmarred by their early struggles. Riva dozet, contentedly nearby, finally safe and loved. In their presence, Hollis felt the full weight of his transformation. He wasn't just treating animals anymore. He was changing their world, one healing heart at a time. I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.